Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Faerie Conclave. This is episode 97. I'm your host, Alec. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm super excited to be doing an extra special Commander Deck interview today with Ree. How are you doing today, Ree?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing good, too. I'm excited because I've been looking at fairy-related cards all week because of the new Eldraine spoilers, and I specifically was interested in your magic content because you have a lot of fairy related stuff and a fairy deck.
Fitting, yes.
Yes. So yeah, right now it seems like the perfect time to have you on as a guest. Yeah, and so I have been a fan of the content I've seen you make for Magic Online, and also just like your general presence is super positive. Which is something I love. So yeah, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit to those people out there who might not know you?
Absolutely. My name is Ree. I go by Raspberry3 on all platforms, Twitch, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, all that good stuff. I am a collector. I am a gamer. I just recently started playing Magic a couple years back, and just recently got into Commander and started building decks for the first time. And I just kind of like making lifestyle content and encouraging people to enjoy more of the beauty of the game, the world building, and the flavor, and just the all-around enjoyment of Magic. And encouraging people to enjoy it as well. So I just like making lifestyle content and showing off the beautiful parts of Magic and what it is.
I love that. I was going to say, I really liked, you had a few TikToks where you talked about the zodiac signs and which planeswalkers they would be. And I'm a Scorpio. And when you said that Scorpios are Liliana, which is my favorite planeswalker, I was like, okay, yeah, you know exactly what you're talking about.
It's incredibly fitting. Yes. I've been told before that a lot of people think that I can just call it as it is. And it's so funny you mention that because you very much are a Scorpio. This is me meeting you for the first time, and I get it. That's funny. But thank you. I had a lot of fun making that TikTok series. It was really cute.
Yes.
I love seeing how excited people got about picking their planeswalkers and whatnot. It was cute.
Yeah. No, I was like, I wonder what Scorpio is going to be. And then, yeah, you just nailed it. Exactly. So, yeah, that was perfect. So I mentioned fairies earlier, and I do have a confession that I am now on episode 97 of a podcast that I call the Faerie Conclave, and I don't have a fairy commander deck. I think I've tried to make one. I know. I've tried making a few times. I've brewed Alela.
Yeah.
The first one, I guess. Now there's a new one, but
I know.
Yeah.
You got a couple options now.
I know. Yeah. And I did I got this secret lair Una, which I love the art for. So I have fairies.
It's so fun.
Yes. Yeah.
You have so much to build with. It is so much fun. It's so flexible, and I think you would enjoy it. Definitely.
Me too. Yeah. I can't explain why I haven't just sent it and built one of these decks for a fairy commander yet, but I don't know. I just haven't. But I have a bunch of the cards, so I think now with the new fairies coming out, I think it's time. Yeah.
It's been long overdue at this point. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. So yeah, I'm excited to talk to you about your deck, which is kind of one that has a ton of cards in it that I love, and I'm excited to talk about it. Before we get into it, I will do a quick shout out for a random patron at the Conclave Mentor level on my Patreon, which I only have 3 right now. So if y'all want to get in there and donate $6, then you can get on for a shout out. But this episode's shout out is going to Lunchbonks. Thanks so much, Lunchbonks. I appreciate your patronage. Okay, it's time. Let's get into the episode, and I'll start with my first question for you, Ree, which is, who is your commander and what inspired you to build this deck in the first place?
Well, my commander is the lovely Alela, Artful Provocateur. She was honestly one of the first commanders that I had ever seen when the Brawl decks came out back in 2019. with Throne of Eldraine, and I immediately fell in love with her. I had grown up with fairies and loving like the whimsy of fairies and the fae and the magic of it. And as soon as I saw her card, I was like, I have to build this. This is it. This is it for me. It's perfect. So yeah, this is I've been having a lot of fun building this deck, and it means a lot to me because it's one of the first decks that I've really put a lot of heart in and a lot of thought into building. And so it's kind of become like my little baby lately. So yeah, it's been super exciting. A little bit of a journey, but we're here, and I feel kind of confident in it now. I feel like I can play it and enjoy it a little more.
Nice. Yeah, I love that. I think one of my favorite things about hearing people's like first decks in and kind of getting into Magic their first time is which creature type they are attached to, because I just love hearing that kind of thing. Somebody's like, I saw my first goblin card and I immediately fell in love with this game. And sometimes I'm like,
is this?
yeah, I'm like, that is so silly. Like, goblins did that for you, but it's always like a different one for different people. And yeah, and I love
Exactly.
that the Alela Fairies deck, which I guess it's not originally, it wasn't super fairy themed. What was it? It was more kind of like around the ability.
It's fairy schemes. So the pre-con that came out, it came out with a whole bunch of other ones, like with Chulane and Corvold and Sir Gwyn. It came out with kind of more of an idea of enchantments and artifacts, and it had a pretty even balance between the two. But it wasn't so much fairy themed like my deck has become. So it started as a pre-con, but slowly kind of evolved into something different. And I made it more of my own. And I just love, as more like the more I looked into fairy cards and the art behind it, the more that I was just like, I just have to make this a fairy themed deck at this point. Like, I just love all these cards. I have to put it together. So it still has that element of obviously enchantments and artifacts, but it's gone full fairy at this point now. So
Gotcha. Yeah, I kind of like that a little bit more. It has like the fairy theme calls to me a lot more than just like creatures with flying, which I guess we've kind of referenced Alela's abilities a few times, but would you mind reading out what
Absolutely.
she does exactly?
Absolutely. So she is a 4-drop legendary creature fairy warlock, and she has flying, death touch, and lifelink. And her ability is that all creatures you control with flying get +1/+0, and whenever you cast an artifact or enchantment spell, create one 1/1 blue fairy creature token with flying. She is a 2/3, and she is definitely she's definitely a threat. I remember when the precons first came out, she was basically a shoot on sight sort of creature to cast. I had a hard time even keeping her on the battlefield a lot of the time. So
yeah,
but she is a menace, that is for sure.
Definitely. Yeah, I think honestly just having a commander that naturally has flying, death touch, and lifelink is just already like pretty hard for anyone to deal with in a game of commander.
It's trouble, yeah. It's a little bit of a problem.
Yeah, like that is the best set of blocking, and then also getting in for a little bit of damage and gaining life. Like those are some good, that is a great combination of keywords.
Truly, it is.
I love it. Nice. So when it comes to playing this deck, what is it about this deck that just makes you love it, makes you want to keep playing it?
So when I first started building the deck, I started playing after I had just started playing Standard and like learning how Brawl works, and I was really in love with playing mono white angels. And so when I first started building the deck, I was putting like Safara, Sky's Blade in there, and like a couple other angel tokens, because I was like, this fits perfectly, it's flying. And it sort of started to evolve into like more of a love for artifacts later on, because I didn't realize early on, I kind of just didn't think about it and kind of overlooked the idea of artifacts up until I started to realize how powerful they were. So I started to, instead of enjoying more of the flyers, I started to realize like how much I liked all the artifacts that could support her and furthering like success while I was playing. Other than that, the artifacts, the enchantments, above all, I think something that I've thoroughly enjoyed while playing this deck is the art. And that's something that I just keep coming back to. The art is just so beautiful in all these different fairy creatures and all of the themed sorceries and instants that go alongside the fairies, the fairy mechanic or dynamic in building this deck. Also, like you mentioned, the secret layer that came out with Una, and all of the other little fairies that came along with that secret layer tossed around in here too, like Vendilion Click and a couple other fun stuff like Glenalandra Archmage and all that good stuff. But the art is just what constantly keeps me wanting to play this, just because I'm excited to see what card I pull and get to like look at and just sit and look at them and admire them in my hand, basically. So
nice.
That is the one thing that keeps me enjoying this deck, that's for sure.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that when you have cards in your deck that just have art that you love, and you'll never get tired of drawing them and playing them, especially if they're fairy related. Like I love all of these.
So pretty. They're so vibrant and fun and whimsical, and they're just amazing. I can't stop looking at them.
Yeah, I agree. And I think especially, I kind of forgot that Eldraine had such amazing kind of world building and artwork. And I've just been thinking about that a lot because of the new Eldraine cards just being just as good, like incredible art.
Oh yeah, just piggybacking off of it. It's like they just left off where they, ended the last set and just like kept pushing through, basically. It's just as stunning as before.
Yeah, I think people look back and only remember like the scary cards that came out for standard at the time, and how kind of overpowered they were. But yeah, a lot of the other cards are still really cool and definitely are worth a look. And I kind of love that this deck has so many of them. And and one thing I love about Alela is it's so like the abilities are so open-ended and you can go so many different directions. And exactly. Yeah, and it's really cool. So I love that you can do so it's whenever you cast an artifact or enchantment. So you could just have like all artifacts and have it care about having a bunch of artifacts, or just only enchantments, or some kind of mix of the two, and you still get the same reward either way.
Exactly.
And then I love that you mentioned that you have Saphira Sky's Blade, which is like cares about having creatures with flying, which of course I feel like most fairies have flying. Yeah.
But how many fairies make other flying indestructible?
Right. Yeah. No, and that's perfect.
She's perfect.
Yeah, you've got this nice like giant angel at the top to help back up all of your fairies. Yeah, it's really cool. I love all the different directions, because if you wanted to do like a whole deck that just cared about like creatures with flying, this would be a great commander for that too.
I've seen people do anything from like adding a bunch of dragons into this to making it just a big flyer deck to making it like a stacks deck and like going just complete artifact on it. It's nuts. So there's so many different ways to play this deck. I think the flexibility about it and the flexibility of Alela in general is what's so appealing to me, and why I think so many other people can enjoy playing her and building around her, because there are so many different ways that you can enjoy playing the deck, whether that's, focusing on auras and enchantments, or focusing on flyers, or you can make it a death touch themed, you can make it demons or angels or anything. It's just there's so many endless ways to make a really cool deck out of her. So it's neat. It's really fun, and it's cool to see a whole bunch of different there's a whole bunch of other people that use her for deck building, and it's just really crazy to see the variety that you can get out of this one card. It's really exciting.
Yeah, agreed. And I think commanders like this that are open-ended and let people kind of customize what they want to do with it are really important to have. and are just really
Absolutely.
cool. But I also think, just for me personally, I think that's one of the reasons why I have had a hard time putting this deck together, is because I
So I
just
had
like,
a hard time putting this deck together.
yeah,
I
it's
couldn't even choose. It was hard.
exactly, yeah, like how do I decide which way to go when I think they're all cool? Like you mentioned
Right?
a Death Touch deck. I love that idea, but I just,
Ooh.
yeah, there's so much, so much.
It's true.
Okay, so yeah, as you played this deck over the last few years, have there been any kind of like notable changes that you've made to it? Like any specific cards that maybe you want to shout out that have been really good includes that you found?
Absolutely. So, as this deck has kind of changed, it started from a pre-con. I only got to play with it. Like, I didn't really get the chance to build it up until I had played with it in Historic Brawl on Arena, and really got to see like how brutal attaching artifacts to Alela can really be, and
Mm,
really buffing her. For the like I told you before, like a lot of the time I was just focusing on fires, and that was a mistake that I had made because there's so much more to this deck. As I've begun to actually build it and think about how I want this deck to play, I started to really have to think about what kind of artifacts I wanted to include that could protect her. Because instead of this just being a big board that gets super wide and just attacks with a bunch of fairies like I was used to, I was getting board wiped pretty easily and coming across a lot of issues with just like mana and being able to play what I wanted. It can be a deck that you can get easily greedy on, and I didn't quite understand that until I started to make my first changes and get pretty serious about building it. And that's when I wanted to start adding stuff like that would do more to protect her than to just let her kind of be more of a threat, essentially. Um, I made some changes like adding in, let's see here. I think I added a couple of like supporters like Glenalandra Liege and Scion of Una. I also added Bitter Blossom, which was a pretty expensive card. I wasn't expecting to add that in there, but I
yep.
just had to have it. It's just fitting. I had to. But once I started adding more cards and artifacts that started to boost and buff Alela and really protect her while she's on the battlefield, it started to change the dynamic of my deck and make it a little more playable than I had once than it once was, at least.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think especially for decks that care about having a lot of creatures of the same type and how they kind of rely on each other to slowly build up until there are too many creatures for your opponents to handle. It is hard to actually get there because, yeah, like you said, a board wipe happens and then you have to start all over, and it's so sad
Yeah.
and kind of
It
difficult to
was
come
one of
back
my
from.
biggest struggles. I did not know how to come back from it for the longest time, and it was definitely something that I had to start actually considering when I was adding
Mm,
cards to my deck instead of just throwing all the pretty cards together like
yeah,
I was before. And so I was like, oh, I actually have to think about this. Oh gosh. But yeah, after considering that, it's definitely the route to go. Yeah,
makes
being
sense.
able to have really strong artifacts to support her and kind of like protect the queen playstyle is probably the most successful way to, in my personal experience with building just a fairy theme deck, is probably the best way to go.
Gotcha. Yeah, you're like, fine, I'll put like a negate in there to try to counter the board wipe. I'll be
Exactly.
responsible.
Actually get some removal in there, something.
Yep. Okay, so when you are playing this deck, do you have any like specific goals while you're playing it that you want to talk about? Maybe like certain cards that fit your strategy really well, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're playing this deck, you basically want to be pretty not careful. Like you want to be careful about when you play Alila, but you want to be able to know that you have a way of protecting her when you put her out because she is such a threat and shoot on sight. People are going to want to remove her as soon as you get her on the battlefield. And so in my experience, being able to get her out and then protect her with something like, what do I have here? I think I have a couple robes in here that are really fun to play. I have the robe of the Archmagi, which is pretty good. I also have like a couple others that like Skull Clamp and Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots, stuff like that that you can put on her and protect her. And give her the opportunity to actually put out a bunch of those fairy tokens. A couple of cards that helped her in that is Glenalandra Liege and Scion of Una. Both of those helping with adding those +1/+1 counters to all of the fairy tokens that are coming out from Alela are super helpful. And being able to focus on that and protect Alela so that you can get a wider board state to be able to either use those fairy tokens as like chump blockers or something that you can use against like any other threats that might come across the board. But being able to protect Alela is kind of the first thing that you want to be able to do when you're playing this deck.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's definitely seems like if Alela's not out, then you're still playing good cards, but you're not getting like, it's not going overboard as much. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, so having, I love seeing stuff like Robe of Stars is another one. I really like this card. You can pay 2 to have equipped creature phase out, and that just protects Alela so well. Yeah.
But then on top of that, I also have Una, Queen of the Fae, in there too, and she also helps make these fairies that kind of, it's kind of like a backup plan. It's not Alela, obviously, but it is a good backup plan to have as well. Just being able to have a constant flow of bodies on the battlefield and a way to protect them, whether that's through enchantments or artifacts, is really the way to go when you're playing a deck like this.
Nice. Yeah, it's good to have kind of some backup strategies. And yeah, you can't go wrong just kind of like dumping a bunch of mana into Una and exiling someone's library and getting a bunch of tokens out of it. So we talked about how board wipes are something you definitely want to watch out for while you're playing this deck. Do you have any other weaknesses or anything that you're kind of trying to keep an eye on while you're playing it besides that?
Definitely. More than anything, I've had to keep an eye on myself. You can get pretty greedy playing a deck like this, or at least in my experience, I have. Being able to be a little more strategic. There is that splash of blue in there. It is mainly blue. So you have a lot of more strategic plays and combos and interactions than a lot of like typical decks. On top of that, being able to like sequence a good be able to manage a good sequence and make sure that you're playing the cards at the right time instead of just being greedy and kind of putting everything that you have out there, which I'm myself, and I've seen a couple other people play like that where they just throw all their fairies out there and then don't have anything to back it up. You have to kind of play slow and steady. You have to pace yourself. But other than that, being able to stick to one archetype while building, kind of like what I was struggling with, was definitely something that was a challenge. Whether that is something that you're just sticking to auras and enchantments, or if you're sticking to stacks, or if you want to just make this like fairy themed or like based off of like an artifact deck, you just want to make sure that you're sticking to the archetype that you're building. But removal will always be a weakness of this deck, whether that's board wipes or spell-based decks. Any type of control deck is going to be a little bit of an issue. And because this deck has a lot of creatures, if you're going to try to waste my time and remove everything that I put out, it's always going to be a problem for this deck. But that's why you have so many other things to counteract those, like your own removal and enchanting like other creatures and making their abilities unable to be used, stuff like that. So there is a way to fight against it with this deck, but it's gonna be inevitable, especially against like any like highly controlling decks.
I like that a lot. I think that's really good advice, honestly, just in general to have, is not to to like think about how many things you should play out all at once, and maybe you shouldn't just be casting every fairy you have as soon as possible.
Oh, yeah.
Even though it's so tempting. Like I do this all the time. Yeah. Yeah.
I learned the hard way. It took a couple of games. It was pretty rough. Took a couple of losses. But yeah, no, it's hard to kind of, you get really pumped up with like the feeling of like putting all these fairies out and having all these cool enchantments and artifacts and like just all of these fun goodies going around and all the fun little card draw here and there. You can kind of get wrapped up into it, and then next thing you know, your board's wiped. You don't have anything in hand and you're like, oh no. So it can be pretty brutal, but there's a lot of good cards that can help combat that. So I'm pretty happy with the way that this deck has turned out after time.
Definitely. Yeah, no, that's a lesson I have learned over and over again, and I probably will still continue to do it. Yeah, I don't know. It's so tempting, especially with decks like this where a lot of the cards really like work well when they're both out. Like I want to play all of the things, and yeah, it's hard to resist. So yeah, I think that's a really good really good kind of like thing to call out to keep track of when you're playing decks like this, but also just in general, I think it's probably a smart way to go about it.
I agree. As a newer player, it was really hard to kind of get an idea of like what controlling a situation or like being able to strategize looks like in Magic, especially when playing Esper, because there's so many different things that you can play. So it was definitely a lesson well learned. That's for sure.
Well, yeah, and I think older players can also take a reminder from that, mostly referring to myself. When it comes to like specific cards in this deck, are there any that you want to talk about that kind of like fill generic roles in a deck, like card advantage, mana ramp, or removal, but that are more fun for the fairy deck?
Oh, definitely. I think a good way to start out with is like kind of the same way that the precon is originally built, which is around artifact creatures and like flyers. I automatically include Baleful Strix constantly. It's just such a good card to have, regardless. Same with Solemn Simulacrum. Those two are just like my go-tos for artifact creatures and card draw. It's just a really good auto include for those two. With the fairy, with there being so many fairies in this deck, I had to include Glenalandra Liege and Scion of Una. Both of them buff my fairy tokens and my flyers, so it's just really helpful to have that alongside with Shroud for Scion of Una. It just makes a drastic buff to all of the tokens and fairies that are on the battlefield. Something that I always include is Damnation. Just a classic mono black or white, honestly. I could not include that at that point, you know. But something else that I had to include with the removal was Supreme Verdict. It's just nice to be able to have some sort of control in a situation and make sure that it's not going to get countered. Because I had a ton of removal in this deck prior that I would just get easily countered, and I was like, man, get all butthurt about it because you can't do anything about it. And so my friend was like, have you heard of Supreme Verdict? And I was like, oh, this is perfect. I should have had this in my deck all along. But yeah, other than that, I mean, I always love putting Bitter Blossom in any kind of fairy theme deck, and then on top of that with the fairy theme, I think Distant Melody is one of my favorite cards. I don't see it too often in a lot of decks, even though it is such a fun card. Distant Melody is just super nice. You get to choose a creature type, and then you get to draw a card for each permanent that you control of that type. So if you have a bunch of fairies out on the battlefield and you cast this for 4, you can just select fairy type, and you can just get a bunch of card draw off of that, especially if you have like a bunch of cards that give you like no maximum hand size. It kind of all just works together. So Distant Melody works really well specifically with a fairy theme deck like this, and it's just an automatic include for me.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Distant Melody because I play this in a couple decks. Like my Oozes deck plays this card. the risk is that if you draw it and you don't have, like, you just got board wiped and then it literally does nothing. But it's so
yeah, you're just sitting there like, what do I do with this?
Yeah, exactly. But it's definitely worth it because then there are the times where you have like, I'll have like 30 oozes out and I'm like, okay, 4 mana, draw literally 30 cards. But yeah, one thing that bothers me a little bit is that it has fairies on the art. So I feel it doesn't feel quite right playing it in a deck.
In an ooze deck.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I love fairies, so I kind of justify it, and it's a really good card in that deck. But
super mystical. This is more oozy than anything.
Exactly. But it feels right in this deck because this actually is fairies. So yeah, of course, it definitely has to be there. It was actually one of
the reasons I wanted to add it, because I saw it, not really knowing what it really did, and I was like, oh, fairies, cute. And I just had a little tab up open for it on my computer when I was building this deck, and then I looked at the text and I was like, oh my gosh. Like, I had no idea how helpful this is in so many different situations. I just picked it for the art because I thought it was cute, but it's much more helpful now.
Like, I love that. You're like, the art is amazing, so it's probably going in, and then you read the ability and you're like, okay, definitely going in.
This is definitely going in.
So good.
Exactly.
Nice.
It's like a happy little surprise.
I also, so one card that I always love to look at, and I haven't played it anywhere yet, but I really want to, is Knowledge Exploitation. And
I have a story for you.
Oh, okay. Please tell me.
Continue. I'm sorry. Continue.
Oh, yeah. No, I was just going to read it. It's 5 blue for a sorcery, and it has Prowl for 3 and a blue, which means you can play it for its Prowl cost if you dealt combat damage to a player this turn with a rogue. And coincidentally, I think a ton of fairies are also rogues. So
there's a ton of rogues in this deck. Yeah.
Yep. And then the ability is search target opponent's library for an instant or sorcery. You may play that card without paying its mana cost. Then that player shuffles their library. And for 4 mana, especially if you've got a rogue out, that's just like, yeah, that's really cool. I love that.
It's nuts. And I happened to find this on a whim. I was at my LGS and I had no idea this card existed until I was looking. I was just buying stuff for a Gruul Goblin deck, and this came across the screen that somebody just left open, and Knowledge Exploitation was just on the screen, and I was like, that's kind of perfect for what I'm doing. Like, maybe I should just grab it. And sure enough, I just grabbed it and tossed it in my deck, and I didn't really realize the power of it until I started playing it, and I was like, oh my gosh. I can take anything from anyone's library and just use it? It's nuts.
Yeah.
But I think the first time I played it was absolutely insane. It was one of the most memorable moments I had while gaming. And it was just this, it just kind of brought the whole deck together. I was like, oh, this is why I've been playing it like this. It was super fun. Yeah,
this is a card, like, people are out here really playing some expensive and powerful instants and sorceries. And yeah, just being able to grab anyone out of the deck and playing it for free I could see that just totally changing the game.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I could understand if you're not searching, like, it doesn't really come up for fairy stuff because it doesn't actually say fairy anywhere on it. It's more about rogues, but the artwork is like clearly a fairy doing some shenanigans, so it makes sense.
Absolutely. Very mischievous.
Yes, for real. So, okay, so if you were going to pick a card out of this deck that you would say is like the MVP or the most synergistic card in the deck, what card would that be?
I have a hard time picking between Una, Queen of the Fae, and Glenalandra Liege. I just really love both of those cards. I think they really speak to the theme of this deck and the overall playstyle. Glenalandra Liege is just the most badass fairy knight I think I've ever seen in my life in Magic.
Yeah.
I mean, just being a 4-drop, flying, a 2/3, and then other blue creatures you control get +1/+1, and then other black creatures you control get +1/+1. And so that's just an automatic, like, +2/+2 counter on just about anything that happens to have blue-black in them.
Yeah.
But it just gives the +2/+2 to Alela automatically if you have her on the battlefield, which is what you're looking for. You want to be able to buff her up and make her more of a threat. And I think Glenalandra really speaks to that. But Una is, like I said, kind of like the backup Alela. She is just as big of a threat, and being able to not only exile the top, X amount of cards that you choose, instead of just putting them in your opponent's graveyard, it's making sure that they're exiled and no longer something that you have to worry about, on top of getting a bunch of these fairy rogue creature tokens on the battlefield as well. So both of those, I think, speak highly to the overall theme of this deck and bring a lot of synergy to it as well. So automatic include for me.
Really good choices. I think especially the Glenalandra Liege is just wild. Like, having Alela be a 4/5 flying Death Touch lifelink is terrifying. And then and there's like quite a variety of fairy tokens. Like they're either blue or black, or blue and black, and just making all of your tokens like 2/2s or 3/3 flyers all of a sudden just adds so much like scary power.
Absolutely. So, I agree. And on top of that, like putting something like lightning greaves on her, or like any other crazy artifact that you have, like it's just so much more fun to play. Yeah,
I'm noticing you have a couple sword ofs giving like protection.
I have a couple of swords.
Yep, the swords on Alela, that's very scary stuff.
I feel very lucky to at least have those cards. I drew those out of packs by luck, just sheer luck of even having those. So that's why I have the pleasure of having a couple swords in here too. So it's definitely a threat, that's for sure.
Yeah, and they fit really well because you get a fairy by playing them since they're an artifact, and then they have their own, of course, abilities that are always very strong. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, there's so many like different directions you could go with this deck. I think just stacking Alela with a whole bunch of equipments and making like a Voltron kind of deck is.
I think about it all the time.
Yeah, you've definitely got a little bit of that.
It can be pretty crazy. Yeah, it can get a little crazy. That's for sure.
I'm just gonna have to think about this. I'll just have to pick
the way you want to go.
Yeah, that's the thing. I need to pick a direction and then just stick with it, and maybe like branch out a little bit. But yeah,
definitely.
I'll figure it out.
Don't try to add it all in one deck, because that's exactly what I tried to do, and it did not work out. It's just confusing, and there's no synergy, and you're like, man, what the heck?
Yeah, makes sense. And then especially if you're trying to put the deck list together and it has like 250 cards in it that now you have to narrow down. It's
it's the worst. It was brutal, that's for sure.
So okay, my next question for you is, do you have any pet cards in this deck that you just cannot resist playing?
Definitely. I got a couple in here that I've had a couple people tell me just not to have in here, because I've had a few friends that are like, you should not have these in here, like this is too much. Or like not even that they're too much, but just that they're not helpful, but they're cards that are just I hold dear to my heart, either because I like the art or just because I think they're quirky and fun. One of those being Violet Paw. I really like this instant. It is a 5-drop tribal fairy instant, and you can destroy a target non-black creature with it and put a 1/1 black fairy rogue creature token with flying onto play. It's a good form of removal. It is kind of like it's situational for sure, but personally I just keep it in this deck because I really like the art. It's just beautiful. It's got this like huge like skull with this beautiful violet on top, and like a little baby fairy emerging out of it with all this like whimsical grass, and it's just beautiful. But on top of it, I really liked the flavor text with it, and it says, a fairy is the offspring of Una and Mischief. And it speaks to my entire deck. I could not go without having this in there. I think it's perfect. It's too perfect for me to like rip it out. Plus, it creates a nice little fairy roam for me. Even though it is a little expensive, it's definitely one of those cards that I'm like, ah, I have to have it in here. It's just too fun. It's too good. It's just,
Totally.
yeah, it's one of my favorites for sure.
This is a perfect example of a pet card because, like, clearly it works in the deck. It makes a fairy token and destroys a creature, which you want to do. I have an issue with the destroy target non-black creature cards. I always want to play them in my decks, but for some reason my play group, everyone just loves playing black creatures all the time.
Yeah.
So I have a hard time with that. But yeah, with this,
Mine
I
too,
mean,
all the time.
I
really got to be
yeah.
picky with it. I'm like, okay, you got this one mono red card. I'm going to destroy it. But everything else is just a black creature, so it's like really hard to combat too. I have the same issue.
Yep.
But it's just one of those cards I got to keep in here. It's just my favorite little card. I think another one that I think is that I would consider a pet card is Hushbringer. It is very helpful situationally in this deck. I've been told also a couple times to take this because it kind of contradicts my deck a little bit. It's good if you are wanting to play it super early on, but it basically shuts down ETBs not only for everybody that you're playing against, but it shuts them down for yourself. And my deck has a couple of ETBs that I would consider really useful. So having Hushbringer on the battlefield and in this deck in general is more of like a fun little thing for me because I loved the art. It was like the first card that I saw out of Wilds of Eldraine that I was like, this is amazing. I've never seen art like this in my life. Like, this is beautiful. This is just on a card and everybody can just have this. Like, it was really crazy for me to like see this card. And so building this deck, I was like, I kind of have to have it in here, even though it's not super helpful late in the game, you know? Maybe after a board wipe, it can be helpful so that you're not trying to like let your opponents use any like enter the battlefield abilities or anything like that. But it can be a little contradicting. So that's why I consider it a pet card as well.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. I do think Hushbringer is honestly probably a card people should just play more in Commander, because I swear there's always at least one deck that is doing either enters the battlefield stuff or dies triggers like hundreds of times per turn.
Yeah, and this immediately can shut it down, especially like during like the beginning of your game when you yourself like playing this deck or trying to get your enter the battlefield stuff, like get your hand set and actually start a strategy. It's nice. She kind of gives you like a little bit of that cushion, like a little bit of control. And I think it's super helpful in a lot of different scenarios in Commander.
Totally. Yeah, I agree. And I have like the art on Hushbringer has got to be one of the most unique arts on a Magic card ever. Like it's
so good.
So good. Much to think about too. Like I've never seen a card that just like stopped me in my tracks quite like this one.
It's so like delicate and so like mysterious all at the same time. It's so pretty. I love it. I the more I've been looking at it actually while building this, I'm like, maybe I should cosplay that.
Ooh.
I have the red hair. I just got to make some fairy wings.
Then you just need some slightly translucent, like giant floating lips somehow.
Yes, absolutely. We'll make it work. I can make a little belt. Have all the tiny lips around as like a little belt. That'd be funny.
And it's a fairy, so yeah, I think this is a perfect pet card for this deck. Okay, so this is a question that I always love to ask, and that is, what has been one of your favorite in-game moments that you've had while you were playing this deck?
I was actually going to go back on the knowledge exploitation that we were talking about a little earlier, because that's definitely one of my most memorable moments when playing this. It was kind of after I questioned if I even wanted to have knowledge exploitation in this deck, and shortly after I played a game with my friend, just kind of play testing against his Mimeoplasm deck, and I wasn't doing too great. I actually caught myself in one of those terrible, awful board wipes that I was talking about earlier.
Yep.
And go figure. I had knowledge exploitation sitting in my hand for a little while, but I just didn't really know how to use it. It was a little intimidating because it would have been my first time playing it. But after all this, my board is wiped. I have knowledge exploitation in my hand, and my friend, he has mimeoplasm on the battlefield, and that's his only creature. And he had used mimeoplasm to exile True Name Nemesis, which basically enters the battlefield. You choose a player, and then that player has protection from the other player, basically. And then he chose Titanith Rex, which is this big, massive trample 11/11 dinosaur beast, and he copied both of them so that it had protection from me, and then it had a bunch of 11/11 counters on it.
Yep.
And my board is wiped, and I'm like, okay, I'm just screwed. I don't know what to do here. And I was trying to think of like how I could get out of this. I played a card and got to scry off of it. I didn't have anything off of that. There was no way I was getting out of this. And so I was like, you know what? I wonder if I can actually get out of this with knowledge exploitation. And I was like, I was like, honestly, I need a little help. Can you walk me through this? And so my friend was like, yeah, sure, like, we'll figure it out. And so I play knowledge exploitation, and I'm immediately like, okay, what do I do to get this big, scary mimeoplasm ooze off the deck right now, like off of the battlefield right now? And I was going through his deck, and I was searching his library and found Life's Finale. And I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna do that. I'm gonna take Life's Finale and just kind of do a board wipe and figure out what I can do from there. So I destroyed his creatures, and then it just basically helped me win the rest of the game. I was so I had no idea that the card had that much power behind it, but being able to like dip into his library and just grab whatever I needed was just the answer to everything. And it made me realize like how powerful that card actually is. It got me out of a real pickle, that's for sure. That was probably the moment I was like, oh, this card is really amazing. I had no idea that I could just jump into anybody's library and take whatever I needed. So it was
so cool.
Definitely a shocker, but this card was just amazing. But to be honest, I haven't really played that much with this deck in person. It's still new. I'm still new to playing Commander. I still go down the LGS and play every once in a while, but this deck is, like I said, more of a pet deck. It's more of like just my fun little baby deck, where I get to put all my fun art cards in and just make it my own. So I'm sure there's plenty more in-game moments that I will have later on to tell you about, but that's just one of the few that I've had that I was like, wow, this is amazing. I had no idea you could do cool stuff like this. So it was really an aha moment for me.
I love that. Yeah, I think, first of all, the best kind of people to play Commander with are the ones who are like, I'm taking something out of your out of your library to use against you. What do you think would be the best thing? And then
like, what can I do?
And having that person be like, oh, let me come grab some options. Like, we can figure this out. Is I love that. Yeah. That's like the energy I want, because I just think that's so fun. I'm
incredibly grateful for people like that, because it's been, I mean, I've had all of my friends within the Magic community at one point be like the guide, the teacher to me. And it's so nice to be able to have people to depend on like that are just wanting to help you learn, you know, especially as a new player. It's definitely something that I appreciate.
Yeah, even as not a new player, I also appreciate that very much. I play a deck that plays off of my opponent's libraries. So there are a bunch of effects in there to like steal more cards from my opponent's libraries, and then I kind of have to like figure out how to play them and what order to play them in. And I just like appreciate my in-person play group so much. It's Evelyn the Covetous. It's like a vampire deck that plays your opponent's cards.
So fun.
It's and it's vampires. Really fun. But yeah, it's one of those decks where I would just never play it with people at a game store, at a convention, if it's like my first time playing with them. Just because so many times I'm like, what do you think I should do, like with your own cards against you? My
Well, yeah,
yeah,
it's kind of like it's scary to ask people like that in those situations because it's like, man, I don't want to
yeah,
make you help me beat you. It's the worst feeling. But it's super helpful when you're with or like surrounded with people that are at least understanding. But also like what I really appreciate like with my friend that I was playing with, like we all just want to see like the craziest outcome possible. Like
yeah,
the
yeah.
more wicked the game gets, the funner it is. And so that's ultimately what we kind of strive to do, like help each other out, but also see like the kooky stuff that we can figure out too.
Totally. Yeah, I'm the same way. And like knowledge exploitation is a fantastic card to get there because, I mean, of
Yeah.
course, like most people are going to have board wipes and like removal spells and maybe protection spells that you can steal to help with whatever's going on.
Right, because
But
then I can just dip in there and get whatever I need. It's like a
yeah,
little treat.
exactly. Like they'll have some responsible stuff that you can use it on, but I'm sure most people are also just going to have some wild sorceries and instants that'll change the whole
It's
game.
true.
Yeah, which when you're building the deck and just like reading the cards online, it's like, I don't know if it'll really do anything. It's like hard to envision what it'll be like. But then, yeah, I'm
Yeah,
sure lots of times you'll draw the card and just be like, oh, wow. Okay, this is going to be
that's
really cool.
exactly what it is, especially being newer. Like building a deck, I've only ever built decks like using Moxfield and just being able to see like the visual card, but seeing it and then playing with it are two separate things because you never really know what you're gonna have in your hand with it. You know,
Totally. Yeah.
it's gonna be a different game every time you play. So it's hard to like try to build a deck exactly how you want it to play because it's never actually gonna be that way at all.
Yeah, it's true. It's totally different. And yeah, and I think this is one of those cards that I think will actually be a lot more fun than you might first expect. So yeah, that's
It
really cool.
has been. It's been a,
Nice.
like I said, a nice little surprise. So I'm glad I added it in there for sure.
Okay, we have made it to my final question for you, which is if anyone out there, also including myself, is thinking about or is it like inspired by this episode to build an Alela deck or a fairy deck of some kind, what kind of advice would you give to those players?
Ooh. One of the biggest things that I had to learn when I was building this deck was to not put all my eggs in one basket and to really kind of sit and think about how you want the deck to play, synergistically speaking, and just what kind of archetype you want to go with because Alela ultimately is extremely flexible, and you can build a variety of decks with this card as your commander, and being able to have a set idea of how you want it to play going forward in building this deck is the best way to start out. If you want to devote it to artifacts, devote it to artifacts. Have fun with it. There's so many different ways to build this deck, and if you want to go like the fairy theme route, there's so many beautiful cards. But try to have it be like functional with Alela because that's what I did. I ended up just putting a bunch of beautiful cards together and then having them not work together. So being able to have an idea and uh, like work towards that and build the deck the way you want it to be, just do it. But make sure it's something that you know won't be like too challenging, essentially. But also just have fun with it. Like it's just a bunch of fairy flyers and mischievousness and just having fun. Like the whole point of this deck is to just play a bunch of like little fairy guys and then give them like a bunch of tools to be super scary and menacing. Um, so there's just so many different ways you can do it. Just go with what seems fun to you.
Awesome. I love that. I think that's fantastic advice. Yeah, and I really like how you mentioned so many times throughout this that the art and how beautiful the fairies are is like such a big part of this deck for you. And I think that's something that I should just take and apply to building a deck like this because that's such a cool way to do it. And I think that's how I want to be building decks anyway, is with cards that I think are cool.
Well, I feel like when you build your decks, it's like your own little art gallery. You get to build your deck the way that you think represents you and the way that you play and what you feel this deck means to you, you know? And so being able to add all the art that means a lot to me and makes me feel like represents the way that I want the deck to play and look, it's just kind of all a representation of me, and you can do that with any deck. But yeah, it's like a little art gallery. So it's fun to. I appreciate the art. I'm a big art lover, so it was one of the reasons I actually got into Alela in the first place. The Minneapolis MagicCon secret layer that came out with all the different artists. When I was in Minneapolis, I happened to meet Alexis Zirit, the artist of the Secret Lair Alela,
Oh,
and
cool.
he signed my card and gave me a poster and signed it. He was just such an amazing person. But yeah, the art is really like what brings me to Magic and why I enjoy it so much. So it's definitely a representation in this deck of why I like Magic and why I wanted to build this fairy deck. So it means a lot to me.
That's amazing. I think for a lot of people, you just kind of get, once you're a little too enfranchised, you kind of ignore the art and tend to just look at the abilities. And like, if the card's not good, then you ignore it. But that's not a fun way to go about Magic. So
It's
yeah,
not.
I really like, yeah, thank you for kind of like bringing me back around to kind of what matters and what we're here for.
Oh,
And yeah,
of course.
I appreciate that.
Thank you. I appreciate you talking to me. This deck is like seriously has been like the one thing that I've been really enjoying about Magic and being able to like be a part of, and having Wilds of Eldraine come out and having all these
Ooh.
fun new cards that we get to add. It's very exciting stuff. So I'm excited to talk about it and bring more life to it.
Yes, same. So exciting. Yeah, and thank you so much for coming on and letting me ask you a whole bunch of questions about your fairy deck today. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you for having me. This was so much fun. I really appreciate you inviting me here.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm glad we could make it work. For anyone out there who wants to find you and check out this deck and the other things you've made, where is it that they can find you?
You can find me at Raspberry 3. It's it's spelled a little wonky. It's like raspberry, but it has three R's and three I's with a three at the end. So it can be a little complicated. But that is my username on all of my platforms. You can find me just about anywhere. But yeah, that is where you can find me.
Sweet. I love it. Sounds good. And I'll have a link to your like beacons kind of like link tree down in the episode description. So yeah, anyone out there, just check that out. And yeah, and you can find that super easily. So yeah, before we kind of wrap things up, do you have any final thoughts on this deck or anything else you want to shout out before we close the episode out?
Shout out to Alexis Zirit, the artist of the Secret Lair, Alela, Artful Provocateur. Truly one of the most amazing people I think I've met within the artists of the Magic community. And he happened to be the very first AP artist, the first artist proof I ever bought. So he definitely brought a lot of life and love to the card, the commander. So big shout out to him, and thank you for just being so kind and letting art live through Magic, and bringing more art and wonderful ideas to the community.
That's perfect. Yeah, we hadn't really talked about it too much, but this Secret Lair art for Alela is absolutely incredible. It's kind of
stunning.
Yeah, it gives me, so it's one of the Secret Lairs where it totally redesigns where everything is placed on a Magic card, and it kind of gives like, it's like kind of comic booky, but it also kind of looks like a metal poster, like a band poster a little bit. Yeah. I don't know, there's something about it that I really love, like the skulls in the background. Yeah, I'll for sure, like if you're watching this on YouTube, you're looking at it, but yeah, you should check out the Secret Lair version of this.
Definitely.
So yeah, for sure.
Beautiful.
Awesome. I love it. That's a perfect way to end the episode, I think. And yeah, so check out Ree's links down in the episode description. and also have my Faerie Conclave links down there as well. And then finally, one last shout out to all of my patrons at the All That Glitters level, of which there is one. So thank you so much, Jeff, for being a patron of the show. I really appreciate it. Yeah, thank you everyone out there for listening to this episode. I appreciate that as well, and I will catch you next time.